and they embraced the hard left. Insane promises were made, zippy social media fairy tales were peddled, cheap groceries, rent control, free stuff. But a dark underbelly of anti-Semitism, Hamas support, and a blind eye to the Russians rose up like a stench. Jeremy Corbyn would have consigned Britain to the dustbin of history had he not been stopped. The Labour Party was lost for a decade, however, and I've seen this movie before. But now the Democrats in New York look set to fall into the same trap. It's time to put out a red alert. Zohran Mamdani may look cute and tidy, well-dressed, but he's dangerous. Behind that Instagram halo, behind that Nepo baby private schooling, he's flogging luxury belief socialism to the most taxed city in America. And those rich kids cheering him on, they've got no stake in the chaos they're selling, but they're happy to blow up working people's lives for social media cred. Britain's Labour Party learnt this all the hard way. Let the cuckoo in the nest and it eats your party alive. Yet Barack Obama, yes, a former president, is now praising Mamdani as the future. Moronic. This is how the Democrats lose their party and destroy a city for a generation. Tonight we ask the question, is New York about to repeat Britain's mistakes? Is the city going to fall? I'm joined in the studio here by Joey Mannarino. We're going to come to you in a moment, but first I think we've got Douglas Murray, commentator, columnist for the New York Post extraordinaire. Douglas, great to see you. How are you?
Very good to be with you.
Is New York about to make the same mistakes the Labour Party made in Britain and put themselves into a socialist tyranny for a decade?
Well, it's certainly possible. I mean, the rise of Zohran Mamdani has been an amazing thing to watch, and you have to give him credit for it. He's galvanized a lot of younger voters, and he caused pandemonium in the primaries and is still doing so. If you look at the polling, and it's been pretty consistent since he won the Democrat primary, you look at the polling and actually it doesn't matter, as it were, whether Mayor Adams dropped out this week, notable as it was in some ways. You can put almost all of the votes together for the other candidates, and they still roughly equal Mamdani's average polling. So this is a huge accomplishment, if you like, by him. The problem is severalfold. One is his incredible lack of experience. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, who you mentioned, had no experience except for being on the back benches and speaking on soapboxes to rallies. Mamdani has almost no experience in the world of politics, or indeed of how to run a major world city like New York. But he's been able to pass off the policies he has onto, I think, some gullible voters, but voters who are looking for some kind of fresh face. And the other options they have don't seem that appealing to them. Mayor Adams was in trouble, wrongly or rightly, and Governor Cuomo is not much loved. But this is an extraordinary situation for, as I said, the world's capital to find itself in.
Well, yeah, how have we got to this stage? You talk about his, the predecessors and various corruption scandals that have littered New York over things. But as a city, as you say, a global capital city, already pretty overtaxed, taxed to the pips almost, you would think. Are we going to see people fleeing that global city, moving to states like Florida, other cities around the world if he gets in, or a New Yorkers seem sort of remarkably unfazed and are sort of sucking this up?
No, everybody who has a long memory in the city knows that New York can indeed go up and down. It is an amazingly resilient city, but it isn't endlessly so. Even the Labour Party in the UK, when it sort of de-radicalized from the Corbynista era, since it came into power in Britain, has instituted tax policies that have seen tens of thousands of multimillionaires leave the UK in the last year. And the effects of that in the economy are very obvious. New York would see a much more striking exodus of wealthy individuals because it's so much easier to move around in the United States. With the genius of the federal system, it's much easier to move around in the United States, relocate to another state, than it is to leave a country like Britain and move, say, to Italy. So the ease with which capital can move and wealthy individuals can move in America simply can't be underestimated, and people will do that. Of course, the reaction of some of Mamdani's supporters to that will be the same as some of the left in Britain, which is, you see, you weren't loyal to this place anyway.
Yeah.
Good riddance to you, you well-off people.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly um, uh, arrogant and frankly sort of teenage response to something that will have a real effect. And of course, Mamdani has this great advantage, which is that he is able to speak to grievance. He's able to whip up the feeling of grievances, just as Jeremy Corbyn was. You don't have to look back only 5 years to the grievances that he was trying to whip up in 2020, his anti-police rhetoric, among many other things. You don't have to just look to that. You have to look about the way in which he talks about well-to-do New Yorkers, the way in which he talks about Manhattan as if it's somewhere where absolutely everybody in the world has a right to live affordably. This is the sort of thing that people who are struggling in New York, particularly young people who are struggling with rent prices and much more, are easily susceptible to. But Mamdani has no answers to any of these things. He's simply offering, as a socialist candidate, he is simply offering what people of his political type always do, which is absolutely everything. And the only question will be whether or not he's able to achieve anything, or even an iota of what he's been promising. And if he fails, which he's absolutely certain to do, I suppose the best that can be said is that his younger voters will have learned one of their first lessons in politics and political voodoo.
Exactly, and also when they come to trying to pay for everything he's promised, when everyone's fled to Florida, things get a little bit tricky. Doug, let's talk about this guy. Obviously, he comes across all shiny and nice and young, and I've spoken to people that have engaged with him, and he's very, he's sort of shaking hands, he's out there, he's meeting people, looks them in the eye, gives them the hard sell. He's clearly quite a charming guy. But well, is he really the wolf in sheep's clothing that some people are suggesting? I know he said some pretty crazy stuff in the past. But what sort of moderating influences around him are there, or is he as dangerous as we fear?
Well, I think he is. I think it's pretty pitiful for somebody at the age of, what is he, 33, to say as he did just today on the, of course, must-watch show The View. Not a show I always enjoy watching, but it was very interesting watching the ladies of The View giving incredibly softball questions, as of course they would, to Mamdani. It was interesting them putting to him a question that actually he doesn't get asked enough. He gets such softballs from most of the media. And they asked him about, when you were describing the police in 2020 as a racist police force, as anti-queer, and all these other just, left-wing shibboleths, radical left-wing shibboleths that he was throwing out. Did you mean that, and do you mean it now? And his only answer to that was that he had experienced an era of growth, that he had grown up between the ages of 28 and 33. If you think that your institutions are completely corrupt in 2020, so corrupt that they can be deemed anti-queer, anti-ethnic minority, what has changed in the period between you turn 28 and the period in which you're 33? What changed that means actually you don't think that anymore? And the answer is simply that some political advisors that have swarmed around him, as they always do, have persuaded him that actually New Yorkers of all backgrounds, of all demographics, do not want to do what Mamdani was saying in 2020 and defund the police. New Yorkers need very good world-class policing. We do not need, as New Yorkers, to have to fear getting on the subway. Female New Yorkers, women in New York, shouldn't have to fear getting on the subway after dark. They shouldn't have to fear that in neighborhood after neighborhood, people will be shooting up on the streets in front of their kids. What is it that has changed in Mamdani that has made him go from defund the police 5 years ago to his current situation where he says that he has amicable discussions with police officers, whatever that means? And the answer is simply he's got political consultants around him, and they've said, look, the defund the police stuff isn't working so well at the moment in the polls. So why don't you pipe down a bit on that stuff? It's the same with the Intifada stuff. He's been perfectly willing to be around all of that chat of the globalize the Intifada people. He's been perfectly happy to do that since the years when he was trying to be a rapper. And now he gets asked about this intifada question, wanting to be mayor of New York, which has, after all, experienced the worst type of intifada. And he's asked about that, and he just steps away from it. But he won't condemn the language. But again, it's just that the political consultants have got around him and said, you know what, New Yorkers don't love the intifada chat. They're feeling concerned about that. They remember 9/11. They remember the second intifada. They know what this stuff means. He's still, like with the police stuff, he can't actually bring himself to condemn the rhetoric which he's swum in for so many years, but he doesn't play it up. It's just a matter of the question is for New Yorkers is who will turn out in November to vote. Mayoral elections in New York have a very low voter turnout. I mean, it's kind of 1 in 4 or 5 of the people who are eligible to vote do vote. The question really is as so often in American politics, it's going to be a question of voter turnout. Maybe Mamdani is the one who has energized the most voters so far. And as I say, I do not see many people rushing to the polls, New Yorkers rushing to the polls to vote incredibly enthusiastically for former Governor Cuomo. However, it is also possible that the closer we get to the election, the nearer we get to that, the more that voters know about Mamdani and his policies and his pronouncements or lack of them, the more there could be still an energized voter base in New York who turns out to vote for anyone but Mamdani.
Indeed. Interesting, just talking about a slightly wide, broader point. You know, we had Obama sort of flirting with Mamdani the other day. Kamala Harris, in a rare moment of strategic brilliance from her, not that she doesn't get these calls right often, kept her distance when she was saying, when she was asked about him, wouldn't even say his name, said she'd back the Democrat candidate. There was clearly no love for her there. Senior Democrats in Washington here, are looking at that hard left agenda with some horror. They're looking at AOC with equal horror and wondering if that's the pivot that the Democrats, could potentially take, and the disastrous consequences that can have when it's, as you say, when voters start to get engaged on it. Will we see the sort of great and good of the Dems pour out for Mamdani before the end, you think, or will they get to November still keeping their distance?
Well, they're slowly falling into line, it has to be said. Governor Hochul, Kamala Harris, they're slowly falling into just backing their candidate. And that's going to be a very interesting thing to see for the future trajectory of the Democratic Party, because for years, Democrats have said, how could the Republicans have got behind this outsider candidate, Donald J. Trump, and why didn't they stand up against him, and why didn't they stop their party going in this Trumpian direction and so on? They've been using that for a decade now. But when a truly radical politician like Mamdani comes along, an avowed socialist, many of those same politicians who spent the last 10 years saying that are saying that he's A-OK, that he's absolutely fine as a candidate. We shouldn't overestimate the extent to which these figures actually do drag the party in their direction. You mentioned AOC. AOC is only one member of Congress and gets a huge amount of attention, among other things, because Republicans and people on the right like drawing attention to her. She is the left-wing version of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who the left and the Democrats love drawing attention to. If you read much of the Democrat media, you would think that the most powerful person in Congress is Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's something that happens in US politics in particular, and it shouldn't be overestimated too much. That having been said, the Mamdani effect would be important not just for New York, but yes, for the future of the Democratic Party. And there's one other thing I'll say very quickly, if I may, which is some Republicans I speak to have started to reconcile themselves to a Mamdani win. And they have reconciled themselves to it and are starting to think of what happens after he wins and the electoral bonus that Republicans will be able to get in the whole of New York State, as well as potentially the rest of the country in future elections, by pointing to the failings of a socialist mayor in New York. I would just remind you and your viewers, Harry, of of the fact that some years ago, where we started off, Jeremy Corbyn stood as the leader of the Labour Party. There were Conservatives who wanted him to win the Labour leadership election in the belief that it would make Labour unelectable. And then he won. And then he very nearly, in 2017, became Prime Minister. So I would say to those Republicans who think they're playing a very clever game on that, don't think that you can actually see more than one curve ahead on the road.
Careful what you wish for. Douglas, I'm going to let you go. But before I do, we touched briefly on Hamas. You are a renowned expert on that part of the world. I saw Donald Trump plugging your excellent book once again over the weekend, Death Cults and Democracies, I believe it's called. I'm halfway through it. It's a page turner. Douglas, what do you make of this deal that's on the table? Netanyahu at the White House on Monday. Look, a ceasefire is in grasp. Should they want it? The same people that have been calling for a ceasefire for months now don't seem to want this ceasefire. What are you taking on it? Will Hamas fold?
Well, the Israelis have signaled that they're going to accept the Trump plan, the deal. The Arab countries have said the same. The world is waiting at the moment to see if Hamas wants to stop the war. And that is so often in every other potential ceasefire, it has always been that Hamas is the ones that have walked away from the table. To my mind, the deal is unpalatable but probably necessary. It's got a whole load of pitfalls in it, and I would just highlight one in particular, which is that in the first phases of the Trump deal, that the Israelis and the Arab states have accepted, but Hamas hasn't. Hamas is meant to release finally all of the remaining hostages that they stole from Israel, dead and alive, and to return them to their families. However, in exchange for that, Israel is to release hundreds and hundreds of convicted terrorists from their prisons. And I just mention that because many people will think that is a necessary price and much more. But as you know, and as I describe in my book about this war on democracies and death cults, this war was started on October the 7th by Yahya Sinwar, who was released in exactly such an exchange 14 years ago, when one Israeli soldier was swapped for more than 1,000 convicted terrorists, including Yahya Sinwar, who went on to start the October the 7th war. So this is a very unpalatable deal. We'll see if Hamas accepts it or not.
Douglas Murray, thank you for joining us on Saves the West. You can find him in the New York Post. You can find him everywhere, really. He's a prolific commentator. Douglas, thanks for joining us. Joseph is still with me. Sarah has joined me. Sarah Selip, Republican strategist.
Yes.
There we go. You guys must be rubbing your hands together, right, with glee at the prospect, as Douglas was mentioning there. You know, a hard left takeover of New York. That's going to be a vote for one of you guys. Jody?
If that's what they want to do, that's what they're going to do. Zohran Mamdani, he's crazier than anybody realized. He wants to give $100 million to keep illegal aliens in New York, too. He wants to commit taxpayer funds to give them lawyers, transgender surgeries, and nobody's even talking about it because Cuomo is too close to the left, too, to really attack. He's Muslim. You saw what happened on 9/11. Did everybody forget? He's not attacking him on that. He's not attacking him on anything because at the end of the day, Cuomo knows he's doomed, and Zohran Mamdani is going to win that election. Elise Stefanik is probably very happy because she's going to be running for governor, and I think this is going to give her a huge way in.
Sarah, be careful what you wish for, though.
You know, after Eric Adams dropped out, everything's probably going to go to Curtis Sliwa. It's not going to go to Cuomo. It's a little too close to the edge. But that being said, Eric Adams did drop out way too late. And Zohran Mamdani, I think it's, 22 points above Cuomo right now.
Yes,
and
it's looking like he's got it. But Republicans have pulled out before as well, right? They have not run candidates in this race.
Right.
Could something like that happen, do you reckon?
Probably, but the thing is, they haven't done any polling since then. I think the last one with Quinnipiac was September 22nd. So we'll just have to wait and see. I really think Curtis Sliwa has a much better chance than people think he does.
Let's talk to Democratic strategist Nick Smith, who's joining us from New York, I believe. Hi, Nick. We heard from Douglas Murray there, the case for the prosecution, I think, against Mamdani. I take it that you don't agree, but if he's so great, why are the bigwigs of the Democrat Party still keeping him at arm's length?
That's a good question. So thanks for having me. I did hear Douglas and his point about, against the assembly member. Here's how I look at this election. This is a change election, and there's a parallel here, which I don't think many people are talking about, between assembly member Mamdani and, in fact, President Trump. Not on policy and everything, but if you think about the word change, when President Trump ran for his second term, he ran saying that prices for everything is too high, and the current administration, that is President Biden, Vice President Harris, in his words, weren't equipped to solve that problem. And on day one, he would get in the office and reduce prices. That didn't happen, but think about how effective that campaign message was. So when folks analyze the assembly members, Mamdani's campaign and why he defeated former Governor Cuomo, just think about the situation in the country. And I think, in fact, he benefited from President Trump being in office, because what we see is someone who is in the White House right now not fulfilling that promise of lowering prices. Gas is up, jobs are down. And so that's why I think Mamdani powered through that primary against a former governor who, by the way, is looking for a second act. So that's how I frame this election. And when it comes down to, well, the policies and what some label as extreme, here's some interesting factoids. First of all, Mamdani is talking about making buses in the city of New York free, which probably costs a couple of mil in a city budget of $116 billion, a state budget of about $200 billion, and of course, the federal scale as well. Go back a couple of mayors and talk about a Republican mayor, Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Guess what he did? He made ferries in the city free, particularly going to Staten Island back and forth. I've never heard anyone on the right wing say that some of these things can't be done. There is a history of these things being done. And by the way, Mamdani, and I come from New York City government. I was first deputy public advocate, which is the #2 office in the city of New York. So I get some of these policies. Mamdani can have a free bus plan that is, in fact, phased in. And recall something else. Governor Hochul has endorsed Assemblyman Mamdani. So you mentioned some folks having some reticence to endorse, and I get it. He's a change candidate. He's younger. He's a different kind of candidate. And the so-called establishment may have some agita about the fact that someone near the assembly speaking to change beat a former governor.
He's got it's quite a shopping list he's got there. You mentioned the free buses, but it's rent controls, socialized grocery stores. As Douglas Murray also said, he's made highly controversial comments about defunding the police. His comments about terrorism, are going to haunt him throughout his political career. He's carrying a lot of baggage. You can see why the Dems don't want anything to do with him. Yes, it's a change candidate, but he's got a lot of baggage, right?
But the Dems have to pick those apart. So let's take defund, for example. I've never said defund police, but I absolutely get what it meant. It did not mean zero out police officers in the city.
That's not what voters. That's not what voters hear, though, is it?
Well, let me finish. If you ask the average voter, what do they want? They're going to say they want police in our neighborhoods. What they don't want are police that are abusive, particularly to Black and brown voters, New Yorkers. I lived here during the height of the stop, question, and frisk problem, meaning that as a Black or brown person, I would go to 125th Street in Harlem, walk outside, and there is a very high chance, with no crime being committed, that I'm going to be stopped, questioned, and frisked for weapons in Harlem. That policy was a Giuliani policy, and there was an abject failure. So when he talks about defund, again, those are not my terms. What I can tell you is the logic of making sure we fund programs that prevent crime does make sense. And it's something that both the left and the right can agree on. For example, mental health programs. We all agree there's an issue with mental health on the subways, and all that stuff. So that's an example of how we can fund programs to help prevent crime. We all can agree.
It all sounding very expensive. It was going to be my next point. He's talked about raising taxes on people that earn over $1 million. That didn't seem to go down too well with the cast of The View today, who were looking a little bit nervous about that. I have to say. He's doing a raid on corporates, even if corporates aren't headquartered in New York. He somehow thinks he's going to be able to raid them just by having boots on the ground and workers in New York. He is going to spook investment in the city, and you're going to see people flock to Florida, right? They're not going to put up with that. And then he's going to be left with all of these promises of free stuff and no way of paying for it.
I'm not sure that's true. If you look at when the President Trump left to Florida, and by the way, he's back, by the way, in New York. I don't think people know that. But when he said that, the rationale was exactly that: tax, tax, tax. Nobody wants to pay crazy taxes. And it is also true that the city of New York covers so many essential services that we, in fact, need to go further. And I don't think it's always necessarily taxing the rich on every single program, but there is a social contract that elected officials of both parties in this country agree to, which is we have to provide for the safety and well-being of our citizens. So, for example, if we talk about healthcare,
I'm going to stop you there because I want to bring in. I'm going to bring in Joey. I mean, Joey, it does. It does sound quite good, right? Free, nice healthcare, nice mental health provision, nicer cops. You can see why people are buying it, right?
I mean, nobody's actually buying it except the far, far left in New York. The rest of the country hears this and they understand it for what it is. These are crazy policies. And people are going to run. I don't know what he's talking about, that there's some social contract. People are going to run out of that city because nobody wants to be taxed through the nose. The taxes are already insane in New York. If you send them even higher, Miami's beautiful. The weather's a lot better. People are running. I'm sorry. They're not going to stick around for this.
But he is ahead in the polls. He is, he took that primary by storm. He has beaten, even without the Democratic machine behind him, he is running an insurgent campaign that is, gaining popular support. What have you guys got in your locker to counter that? Because, there's a younger generation of voters, and Nick, seems pretty enthusiastic about it all. What have you got to, what are you going to fight him on the issues?
The sad thing is in New York, Republicans have given up. The Republicans have given up on many urban areas, and I think that's a big failure for our party. We cannot let these cities fall, and we've too often just let the far left take them over, and we're losing big time for that reason. I don't want to see our cities fall, and we've really allowed it to happen.
Do you think the governor race will be lit up, as Douglas Murray touched on there, by Mamdani?
I do. Hochul's weak anyway. People don't really care for her very much. She only got in because Cuomo had all those problems, if you remember. So she shouldn't even be there. Of course, okay, she did win the one time, but whatever. Very close. I think it was 6%, if I'm not mistaken. Stefanik, who's probably going to win that primary, she's a much stronger candidate. She's a prolific fundraiser. So I have a feeling that race is going to be very winnable, especially if you have that socialist lunatic down there doing all his craziness.
All right, we're going to go to a break, but one final word from Nick. Socialist lunacy, are you going to take that 10 seconds to hit back on socialist lunatic there, Nick?
Yeah, I think when the midterms come around and the next presidential comes around, we'll see the benefits of electing a change candidate like Mamdani, guaranteed.
All right, guys, I think this debate's going to rage on until November. After the break, we've got Congressman Andy Biggs. Don't go anywhere as we return to the awful killing of Charlie Kirk and free speech. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. Remember to subscribe on YouTube. All the great content there. Harry Cole Saves the West on YouTube. You don't want to miss that. Now, the demonisation of politicians has hit fever pitch. In America, we saw the grotesque endgame of that, the murder of Charlie Kirk, after years of the left branding him racist and Nazi deplorable. Now that same poison is coursing through the politics of Britain. So Keir Starmer, Prime Minister, calls Nigel Farage an enemy of Britain. His deputy David Lammy even smeared him as having flirted with the Hitler Youth, which would made him quite old in my book. All the while, Farage's security detail has been quietly downgraded. So here's the question. Have we learned nothing? Is this the same rhetoric that ends in violence? And is free speech itself also under attack? That debate raging on both sides of the Atlantic. But my guest now is Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs, who's warned about the dangers of gagging political opponents, but also the dangers of political rhetoric. Congressman, thank you for joining us. You're a big advocate of free speech. You've campaigned on it, but political violence and essentially the horrific scenes within the last 3 months would suggest that we're not really finding the balance there, are we?
No, that's right. It's really difficult. The rhetoric's really hot, really rough. I mean, everything from anti-certain religions and that kind of language, anti-political speech, and the result is, Harry, as you might guess, is that there are certain people that respond to that, and they cannot respond and logically at least give a pseudo debate. Even they turn to violence, and that's what we're seeing.
After the awful scenes in Utah for three or 4 weeks ago now, Turning Point USA has returned to Utah this week or over the weekend under bomb threats, campus evacuations, wall-to-wall security. The tension is high. What does that say about the state of things in America right now, and what do we do about it?
Well, unfortunately, the state of play in America is violence is getting stronger, and it's present and it seems to be ubiquitous. It's if you step back and take a look at it, and it's very scary. Last night when I was there, we had drones, we had I don't know how many different police agencies were involved in providing security, plus private security, and this is and then you had 4 Mormons, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, sitting on the stand, and you have people today in Arizona castigating TPUSA for having 4 members of the church on the stage in Utah, and in the type of terms that exercises violence, which you saw against the church, that's the same church in Michigan just a couple of days ago. So, Harry, it's big, it's palpable.
Are we reaching an era where sort of young conservatives are not safe on campus and just not going to be speaking out in the way? Obviously, Charlie Kirk was a pioneer in that, but without, as you say, the SWAT teams and bomb squads and drones, is it even possible to have these debates in a civilized, reasonable manner?
Well, I think we're at I hate to use the term turning point, but I think we might be at a turning point. You're seeing some really malevolent actors come to the fore, but this movement that Charlie created, it seems to me to be so strong, and the people and the young people in particular who adhere to, I mean, the principles that he was trying to espouse, which is, the West is good, America is the greatest country that ever was, and we have to preserve the Constitution. That was the divinely inspired document, and we have to be religious and get back to having families and save the family. You're seeing that movement now is being driven by young college-age kids who are not afraid to speak out. I hope that it doesn't get worse before it gets better. I hope that we're going to see a turning point now where it actually gets better. But unfortunately, we still see some of this horrific, hateful rhetoric.
The White House, from the president down, including Vance, VP Vance, have been very quick to pin this on, entirely the rhetoric of the language of the left. They've been vowing various clampdowns on groups like Antifa. Pam Bondi even suggested, criminalizing hate speech, which is something the Brits have got into trouble over there. Is it really the proviso of just the left? I know there are statistics out that see left-wing violence and left-wing terrorism is on the up, but is it really an exclusively left-wing problem in your view?
Well, I would suggest that it's primarily a left-wing problem, yes, and that's coming from a guy who's just a hardcore conservative, but nobody that I associate with or that I know is actually, or looking at that's even in my circle, advocates the kind of violent rhetoric that we hear from the left. I mean, when you demagogue somebody and you're saying they're a racist, they're a Nazi, they're a transphobe, homophobe, Islamophobe, whatever. That's a method of dehumanizing you instead of having the debate. And that's what killed Charlie Kirk, because Charlie wanted to have a debate. And he wanted to have it where you set aside the ad hominem attacks and you start going, I think my ideas are better. You prove me wrong. We're going to debate on this. I've literally watched him say to somebody, that's the best argument against me that I've heard. That's the type of thing that you get when you're debating. Stop debating, use ad hominem attacks, get out of logic, move to visceral reaction, and I think that gives birth to violence. I believe me, I just see a lot of incoming.
Back in the UK, Nigel Farage, who I know I think you've crossed swords with over on your committee, leader of Reform. The Prime Minister, the actual Prime Minister, has branded him a racist essentially for his immigration policies and called him an enemy of Britain. Can you draw a line, do you believe, in the rhetoric from politicians themselves? Farage is saying he's being put in danger by that rhetoric. Do you think he's overreacting, or is that fair?
I don't think he's overreacting. I think, first of all, political leaders are just that. They are leaders. They actually they lead, they change opinions, they help create opinions. And when you start saying that someone like Nigel Farage, because he wants a different immigration policy, is somehow a racist and any number of things, you again, you dehumanize him. And there are people who follow political leaders rather closely, and basically they assimilate that point of view because they feel close to that person, they like that person, and so it might inspire actions. And I don't know, but I would guess that Nigel receives death threats just like we as members in Congress receive. Because I'm routinely called an insurrectionist, a rioter, a Nazi, you name it, I'm called it by my political colleagues. And the result is a lot of death threats.
Yeah, the tension's certainly high. You've your committee, you're on the House Oversight Committee. You're bringing in the some tech CEOs next week, the likes of Reddit, Twitch, Discord, to testify. What are you hoping to get out of that hearing? And is the sort of radicalization online and the rise of political violence and people, sharing that online, is that what we're getting into?
I think we're going to cover that. I think we also want to cover, has there been government interference in deplatforming conservative voices? Because we saw that under the Biden administration. So we want to get to that. We also want to talk about, how are they screening? I mean, obviously, they want to say that they're a platform that they have no liability for anything. Unlike a publisher in the U.S. We call that Section 230. So they want that protection to be able to let everybody on except for conservative voices. And so they allow violent speech to go on, but they don't want any kind of liability. And so if you're a publisher in the U.S. and you allow that kind of liability, you might be swept up in a defamation lawsuit, and they don't want that. So I think this is basically a prelude to actually closer examination of that Section 230 provision.
Yeah, so it's a debate raging in the UK. Where just get your final thoughts. I don't know how closely you've been following, but a man from Arizona, a comedian called Graham Linehan, stepped off a plane at London Heathrow Airport and was detained by 6 armed anti-terrorists and police officers for a joke he'd written on Twitter. A US-hosted company. He'd written it while outside of the UK. It wasn't a very funny joke, but it was a joke nonetheless about trans, and was detained by the police. What is your, as a man from Arizona, what do you make of that and the plight of who could be next?
Well, we were outraged by it. We actually had a hearing on the erosion of free speech in the UK, and of course this case came up, and yeah, I'm not sure that I thought it was a particularly funny joke, but the fact of the matter is he was expressing something here which would be protected speech, and he goes back to the UK, but because of some of your laws now, he was arrested. I mean, I do kind of track a little bit what's going on with speech in the UK, because we're the upstarts. We're only a few hundred years old, and the UK actually is what gave us classical liberalism, and I see a massive erosion of classical liberalism in the UK. I'm watching the night. I don't know how old this lady is. She's a grandmother. She holds a sign outside an abortion clinic, and she says, yeah, I'm not coercing you. Just if you want to talk about this, I'm willing to talk. And she gets hauled into jail. I mean, these are the types of things where you say, what's happening with the West? That's why I like that Harry's trying to save the West, because the West needs to be saved.
Congressman, thank you for playing your part in saving the West. And come and see us again soon. We're nearly there. We've got a few issues we've got to iron out, but we're getting there. Congressman Biggs, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Guys, my panel's still with me. Sarah, what do you make of that on that fine line between, in the aftermath of Charlie's tragic murder? We saw Pam Bondi rush out to sort of say we want to sort of legalize hate speech. We're going to, people seeing hundreds of people fired from jobs up and down the country, a lot of teachers, weirdly, for things they wrote about the murder. is America in danger of going too far the other way and overcorrecting this? Obviously, First Amendment protections we have here, but not in the United Kingdom. Or is the balance about right? Where do you see it?
I think that honestly, over the past maybe 10 years, you're looking at exactly what we shouldn't be doing. So Kash Patel and Pam Bondi both came out really quickly saying what maybe they shouldn't have. And they rushed to it. Like Kash Patel talking minute by minute about what was going on with the murder, that's not really what we're used to. And Pam Bondi in the same way. But in that reign, we saw so much as conservatives with Twitter, Twitch, Reddit, and everything of this sort being censored.
Deplatforming people.
Yes,
Covering up
don't-
Hunter Biden's laptop story. Yeah.
But I don't see that being the problem for us because we have to be overly cautious in that sense, not to be those people. Elon Musk didn't take care of Twitter and buy it and change it into what it is just to let it be what Jack or whatever his name was created.
Do you think that people in the administration got that? When Bondi came out with those comments about hate speech, we've seen what's happened in the United Kingdom, where people get literally arrested for jokes they've told on Twitter. I thought the MAGA base, the MAGA influencers, and that crowd were out pretty quick. Is it DOA? Have they put that to bed?
After the memorial service, I think people took the time to actually take a step back and see what can we do next. Everybody was feeling so deeply. People took a step away from all social media. I considered, but it is literally my job to do this. And honestly, after last night in Utah, just watching Alex Clark and the likes talk about Charlie and the legacy and where we're going moving forward, it ignited a new movement of conservatives on campuses. The turnout's been insane.
Joey, a revival rather than a memorial, as I think someone described the Charlie's funeral as. Can the Republicans, without putting too sort of gross a point on it, Charlie was obviously a free speech advocate. He's also a brilliant campaigner. Yes. Are the Republicans going to be able to capitalise and lock that in as a voter base? Do you believe?
Absolutely. I mean, people that were not even thinking about politics and we're not even thinking about Charlie Kirk, they're all now focused right now, and they're all watching and they're listening to the things he said over his long career. He had 10 years of speeches and all these wonderful debates. People are listening and they're saying, wow, he made a lot of sense. Why is everyone calling him a Nazi? Why is everyone calling him far right? What does far right even mean? Because the term is so overused, and now nobody even understands what they're talking about when they say it.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I mean, Douglas Murray at the top of the hour was discussing it a little bit as well. But these terms that we throw around, and we're talking about defund the police and the hard left and fascist, Nazi, Nigel Farage being called an enemy of Britain. Are we at risk of just sort of completely devaluing these words?
Well,
and actually,
absolutely.
do they still have the same impact? If someone calls you a Nazi, or in the left's view, it's like, no, the worst thing you could possibly be in the world is a racist.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to, those attacks don't seem to be landing.
No, at this point, you call me a racist, I just laugh. You call me a Nazi, haha. 10 years ago, I would have been extremely offended. How dare you call me a Nazi?
Oh,
now I wake up in the morning and called a Nazi. So whatever, it's my alarm, I guess.
Are you uncancelable then, or do you take it, you still take it personally?
I still have feelings, but listen, there are words like woke and insurrection that over the past few years we've really used so far into oblivion that it's like they don't carry the same weight. Like, I don't like being called a racist. I don't like being called a Nazi, but I expect it.
I don't like being called woke. But how do we get? Obviously the tensions. The security around the Turning Point event in Utah yesterday, obviously, rightly protected. How do you? In your view, is that just going to become a standard fare now for conservatives and speaking? They're going to need drones. And
absolutely. I mean, Charlie
Kirk. Pretty sad state of affairs.
Yes, Charlie Kirk. His funeral had the same sort of security system as the Super Bowl, and that is absolutely insane. Like, his funeral will have more viewers than Bad Bunny. Yeah, and that's saying something.
We got into the Bad Bunny.
Oh, Bad Bunny. Adrian told me.
Talking of overuse of the word woke, but the woke NFL. Joey, I mean, how do we take the rhetoric down? Is it helpful from the White House, to be instantly going after the hard left, and on the flip side, is it just a right-wing issue?
Look, it's an issue that is going to be coming from the left, whether we match it or not. The left has been calling us these things forever, and if we just sit there and take it, we're going to be the ones having all the incoming, and I don't think it's right.
All right, we're going to go to a break. After that, we will be discussing a sombrero. You don't want to miss that. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. Remember, subscribe on YouTube. You won't miss a thing. Harry Cole Saves the West. Well, Sarah Selip, Republican strategist, is still with us. And joining us down the line is Democratic strategist Sarah Mercer, who, as a junior at Columbine, knows firsthand the trauma of gun violence in America. Sarah, we were just discussing there the rise in rhetoric, the political tensions. We've seen horrific scenes in Michigan, in Dallas, obviously the assassination of Charlie Kirk in recent weeks alone. And then, I mean, when you see headlines like that, when you see these stories, these horrific actions, how do you feel that, has America moved on in any way?
Hi, Harry. Thanks for having me on. As you mentioned, I was a junior in high school when Columbine happened. I was at a high school just a few miles down the road. And, you know, really have been trying to make sense of that act of violence ever since then. I happened to know one of the gunmen. He and I did extemporaneous debate together and found myself as a very confused teenager wondering, you know, how could this kid who by all sort of means in the way that I knew him was just like me, and how could he sort of fall into this rabbit hole and commit this unbelievable act of murder against other kids who were my age? And then had to live through, really sadly, the Aurora movie theater shooting. One of my closest friends was the ER doctor who received several of those victims as they came into the hospital there in Aurora. And as I said, have been really trying to make sense of this type of violence in our country ever since then at a very personal level. You know, you were just talking about, you know, the rhetoric in the US, and one thing that has really confounded me is that we're finding ourselves in a place where individuals feel that this type of gun violence and really these awful assassinations, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, that this is the way that we solve disagreements in this country. And in addition, that, you know, individuals, perhaps like the gunman at Columbine, the gunman, unfortunately, just 2 weeks ago, another school shooting here in Colorado at Evergreen High School, that these gunmen find themselves depressed, isolated, despondent, and that this is the way that they choose to act out. It's been over a generation now since Columbine, and it just is such a tragedy to me that we haven't been able to figure out how to curb this issue in any way. And that we haven't really been able to sort of rebuild it and reweave our social fabric together so that this is not something that individuals in our society result to when they're feeling this way.
There does seem to be a rise in politically motivated violence of late. Do you believe as the White House say that, you know, Democratic politicians have essentially blood on their hands, and the rhetoric and the heated of the debate, you know, it falls to politicians to, you know, to stop stirring this stuff up? You know, Charlie Kirk was, you know, accused of being a Nazi, a racist, that, you know, every other name under the sun. Do you think that Washington has to, you know, have a look in the mirror on this one?
I couldn't agree with Congressman Briggs more, who you just had on, that this rhetoric matters, words matter, and that we all need to be responsible for the things we say, whether that's face-to-face to individuals in our lives, as well as on social media. You know, one thing that I would challenge each of us to do is that in our conversations, that when we hear others dehumanizing and using labels, that we call it out, that especially in our closest, deepest relationships, we should be willing to remind those who we love that those who have different political views than ours are not our enemies. And in fact, one of the things that makes this country the greatest country in the world is the fact that we can and should have political disagreement. Well, look, our democratic system and our institutions were set up to be bipartisan. Yeah. And we are just in a situation where, you know, the system feels so broken in so many ways because we're not willing as individuals and as Americans to really buy into that idea anymore.
On that exact point on bipartisanship, has slightly collapsed in DC, obviously, with the government shutdown, which has also descended into something of a meme war. Hakeem Jeffries has been being popped into Sombrero. The vice president stood in the White House today and said the Sombrero memes will stop when the Dems reopen the government. I think we can see the meme in question here.
Look, guys, there's no way to sugarcoat it. Nobody likes Democrats anymore. We have no voters left because of all of our woke trans. Not even black people want to vote for us anymore. Even Latinos hate us. So we need new voters. And if we give all these illegal aliens free health care, we might be able to get them on our side so they can vote for us. They can't even speak English, so they won't realize we're just a bunch of woke pieces of shit, you know, at least for a while until they learn English and they realize they hate us too.
Sarah, you're giggling away there. I mean, the Vice President says it was a joke, and these are serious times, but the President's having a bit of fun. But it's a slightly strange, mad world when this is the content the White House are putting out. Right?
I mean, let's talk mad. The Boston mayor talking about racism and bringing out a mariachi band. There were like 12 people there anyways, but that was probably one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. Democrats think that's okay, but get upset over this.
Are they genuinely upset about it, or
yes.
is he just in there hearing?
But also think about the mariachi of it all, and the illegal immigrant who didn't speak or read English, who just killed 2 people in a truck wreck because he couldn't read the signs on the road. Like, we have to think about that with immigration, and they're doing this to themselves, honestly.
The troll-in-chief of the White House is just winding everyone up, or is this working, or is it? Talk me through the logic.
It's hilarious, okay? And it gets attention. It gets people talking about it. And look, if the truth of the matter is what they're having Chuck Schumer say, obviously it's fake. That's pretty much what the Democrat Party is doing right now. They have ruined their reputation among much of the electorate, and they are now shutting the government down for illegal aliens and just letting the American citizens bear the brunt of it. It's incredible to watch.
Sarah Mercer, you still there? What do you make of that as a Democrat? Laughing or not helpful?
Look, from where I sit, I think the American people would say 3 words to any member of Congress, which is do your job. We saw a bipartisan statement issued by the National Governors Association, Oklahoma Republican Governor Kevin Stitt, and Maryland.
Gonna have to leave you there, Sarah. I'm afraid we are out of time. Sarah, Joey, thank you for joining us tonight. That was Harry Cole, Save the West. Don't forget to subscribe. I will see you tomorrow.